Welcome back, dear students, in the Pharmacology lecture online series. I, Dr. Tushar Baheti, is going to start today about the respiratory system. And in this, I am going to cover the pharmacotherapy of bronchial asthma. So I hope all of you are safe at your home. So stay safe, stay positive. In this lecture, first I'm going to cover introduction of asthma, then pathophysiology of asthma, then various drugs which are used in the asthma like sympathomimetics or beta-2 agonist drug, methylxanthines like theophylline, anticholinergic drug, leukotriene antagonist and mast cell stabilizers, corticosteroid, systemic as well as the inhalational corticosteroid, omalizumab, which is one of the IgE antibody. Then we are going to cover the stepwise treatment approach in asthma, and in last we will cover the status asthmaticus, on which most of the time a short note is also asked in the examination. So introduction of bronchial asthma. So first we will see the definition. The bronchial asthma, it is characterized by hyper responsiveness of tracheobronchial smooth muscle. So smooth muscles of respiratory tract, mainly the trachea and the bronchi, they show increased responsiveness or hyper responsiveness to variety of stimuli. The stimuli may be in the form of pollen grain or dust particles or any other allergen, resulting in narrowing of air tubes. So there is a narrowing of air tubes, or in other language you can say it is a bronchoconstriction. So this is the main pathology. Bronchoconstriction happens in asthma, which can often accompanied by increased secretion of mucus, mucosal edema and mucus plugging. Now, because of bronchoconstriction, what are the main symptoms in asthma is a dyspnea or breathlessness, as the enough air is not reaching into the lungs. Then second symptom is a wheezing. Rather than symptom, it is a sound which is heard during the auscultation, and it is a loud sound which is heard during the expiration because of the bronchoconstriction. Then a cough, and it may be a limitation of activity of that person. Previously, asthma is thought to be only an allergic or hypersensitivity phenomenon, but nowadays it is recognized to be a primarily inflammatory condition. So it is a chronic inflammatory condition, and this inflammation is underlying hyperreactivity. So there are both component, chronic inflammation as well as hyperreactivity. Now, variety of trigger factors are involved in the persons with asthma, like any infection, especially bacterial or viral respiratory infection, any irritant like allergen, pollution, exercise. Exercise may increase the or worsen the attack of asthma in some patient. Exposure to cold air and sometimes psychogenic. So these are all triggering factors for the inflammation in the asthma. Nowadays, asthma is considered mainly of two types: extrinsic asthma and intrinsic asthma. So what is this extrinsic asthma? In this, mostly there is a known allergen is involved. Okay, and this is mostly episodic. So patient don't have the problem or symptoms of asthma throughout the year. Only in the particular season, especially in the winter season, this problem is more. So it is a episodic, and in between the two episodes of asthma, the patient is mostly all right, but and this is less prone to status asthmaticus. Status asthmaticus is a severe acute asthma, which is one of the emergency condition, and there are less chances of extrinsic asthma proceeding to the status asthmaticus. And the second type is intrinsic asthma. It tends to be perennial, means it can be present throughout the year. The patient has symptoms throughout the year, and status asthmaticus is more common in the intrinsic asthma. Now coming to the important part, that is the pathophysiology of asthma. So in this diagram, first you can see this is the antigen. So there is an entry of antigen in the body through the respiratory tract, and there are various antibodies in the body, especially five types of antibodies: IgM, IgD, IgE, IgA and IgE. So in that, IgE is particularly handling the allergic particles. Okay, so antigen reacts with the IgE antibody, and this IgE antibody it is attached to one of the cell which is present in the respiratory tract. That cell is called mast cell. So on the surface of mast cell there is a IgE antibody present. So what happens whenever there is an entry of antigen like pollen grain or dust particle, it first reacts with a IgE antibody. In the first setting, the antigen and IgE antibody is react activated, but no further sequence of events happens. Okay, so that is called sensitization. But when the second time same antigen enters into the body, the antigen binds to the IgE, and this complex then binds to the mast cell, and this mast cells contains various inflammatory granules. So as soon as the antigen and IgE antibody binds to the mast cells, there is a degranulation of mast cells, and those granules are liberated into the smooth muscles and even in the lumen of the bronchi and the trachea, and these granules contain certain inflammatory reagents like histamine or leukotrienes. Okay, so mast cells degranulation, it causes liberation of various LT means leukotriene. Now these leukotrienes binds to the various receptors of leukotrienes, especially cysteine leukotriene receptor, and by binding to the cysteine leukotriene receptor, this will cause the bronchoconstriction. But there are not only the liberation of leukotrienes or histamine. There are two types of reaction from the mast cell. One is the early phase reaction where there is a liberation of histamine and leukotriene which will cause the bronchoconstriction. But in the late phase reaction, there is a liberation of various prostaglandins also, which can be responsible for chronic inflammation. Okay, these drugs we will cover in the coming slides. So here you can see mast cells present in the lungs and various other inflammatory cells like eosinophils or lymphocytes. They are recruited as a result of initial reaction, and they produce a multitude of or many inflammatory mediators. So these are the various inflammatory mediators. So release of mediators which are stored in the granules of mast cells as we discussed in the previous slide. So this occurs as an immediate, or that's also called as early phase reaction. So histamine is liberated, leukotrienes are protease enzymes are liberated, and TNF alpha are liberated. Then release of phospholipids from the mast cell membrane, which is followed by mediator synthesis. So which are the next mediators which are liberated? They are the prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and platelet activating factor. So all these are the mediators of inflammation, means they are producing the inflammation. So what they will do, these mediators together constrict the bronchial smooth muscle. So there is a constriction of bronchial smooth muscle which causes the mucosal edema. Hyperemia means increase in the blood flow to the mucous cell, and it produces the viscid secretion, means very thick secretion, and all these results in the airway obstruction, because of which air is not going into the lungs and the patient is suffering from breathlessness or dyspnea. But the one thing which is good in most of the patient in the early stages, that this is the reversible airway obstruction. So if we are going to give the drugs in the initial stages, it may not progress to the chronic inflammation and the patient may not have any other complications. Now coming to the pharmacology of drugs. So we have seen the various steps in the pathophysiology. So we have drugs for most of the steps. Okay. So first step is a what? Entry of antigen into the body and reaction, and it will react with the IgE antibody. So if we are going to prevent the antigen antibody reaction, antigen and IgE antibody reaction, if we are going to prevent that, then further sequence of events will not occur. Okay, but this is practically difficult or impossible. Okay, we cannot prevent total exposure to the antigens, but we can, yes, try to avoid the possible allergens. Okay, so if the particular patient is known that I am allergic to the dust or I am allergic to the pollen grain, so he should avoid exposing to this type of the allergen or this type of the environment. Second thing is neutralization of IgE. Now already antigen is reacted with antibody, so what is in our hand? We can neutralize the antibody. And for neutralizing the antibody, that IgE antibody, we have formulated another antibody, and that is the called as a omalizumab. Remember, whenever there is a last three mab word in the name of the drug, it is a monoclonal antibody. So omalizumab can neutralize the IgE antibody. Third step is the suppression of inflammation. Okay, so actually this is the latter stage, but these drugs are important. That's why I discussed earlier corticosteroid, and these are the most important drugs in the treatment of asthma, because the rest of the drug, they are giving a symptomatic relief, or they are having like a temporary relief, but corticosteroids, these are the mainstay, as they are going to suppress the chronic inflammation in the asthma. So there is a short note which is very commonly asked on the role of corticosteroid in bronchial asthma, which we will cover in the coming slides. Next is a prevention of release of mediator from mast cells. Okay. Now IgE is reacted with the antigen, and that complex is attached to the mast cells. Now what is the next step? Degranulation of mast cells. So we can prevent the degranulation of mast cells, means granules to release from the mast cell, and that is done by the drug called mast cell stabilizer. So there are 2 or 3 drugs in this category, like sodium chromoglycate. So this drug will prevent the degranulation of mast cells. So these are having a mainly prophylactic role in the asthma. Next step is antagonism of released mediators. Now from mast cells, which mediators are mainly released? Yes, leukotrienes. So we can prevent these leukotrienes, and there are the drug called leukotriene antagonist like montelukast and zapirlukast. So they are going to prevent the leukotrienes by antagonizing the cysteine leukotriene receptors. Now next 3 drugs, they are nothing but bronchodilators. So after the leukotrienes are released, they will cause the bronchoconstriction, and the patient will have a breathlessness. Now what is in our hand? We can dilate the bronchi, or we can achieve the bronchodilation. And there are 3 types of the bronchodilators. One is a blockade of constrictor neurotransmitter. Remember, there are 2 systems in autonomic nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic system, through beta 2 receptor, it will cause the bronchodilation. While parasympathetic system, through acetylcholine, it will cause bronchoconstriction. Okay. So we have to give the agonist for beta 2 receptor, as well as sometimes we have to give the drugs which are inhibiting the acetylcholine receptor, that is anticholinergic drug, especially M3 receptor blockade. So these anticholinergics, they are causing the blockade of acetylcholine receptors. Next is a mimicking the dilator neurotransmitters, means beta 2 agonistic drug, and last is a directly acting bronchodilator. So they are producing the bronchodilation through some other mechanisms, and these are the methyl xanthines. So this is the approach to the treatment of asthma. First we will prevent the antigen antibody reaction, then neutralization of antibody, suppression of inflammation, prevention of release of mediators from mast cells by giving mast cell stabilizer, then leukotriene antagonist, which will antagonize the leukotrienes, and these are the 3 bronchodilators. Now coming to the classification. So yes, we have seen the name group name. Now we will see the individual drugs. First is a bronchodilator. As I told you, there are 3 types of bronchodilator. So first is a beta 2 sympathomimetics or beta 2 agonistic drug, which will stimulate the beta 2 receptor, or which will stimulate the sympathetic system. In that there are salbutamol, terbutaline, bambuterol, salmeterol and formoterol, out of which salbutamol is very commonly used, and it is a short acting beta 2 agonist. Salbutamol and terbutaline, these are the short acting beta 2 agonist, also called as a SABA, while salmeterol and formoterol, these are the long acting beta 2 agonist, also called as a LABA. Okay. Second group of the drug is a methyl xanthines. It includes the drug like theophylline, aminophylline, choline theophyllinate, hydroxyethyl theophylline, theophylline ethanolate of piperazine. This is the single drug, theophylline ethanolate of piperazine, and doxophilin. So these are the directly acting bronchodilators. Okay. And third group of bronchodilator which are inhibiting the acetylcholine M3 receptor, that is a anticholinergic drug from atropine group. But not atropine is used. The other two drug like ipratropium bromide and tiotropium bromide, they are used because on the bronchial smooth muscle M3 receptors are present specifically, and these are the selective M3 antagonist, ipratropium bromide and tiotropium bromide. So first group is bronchodilator. Okay. Second is a leukotriene antagonist. There are two drugs, montelukast and sapirlukast, which will antagonize the leukotriene receptors. Third group is a mast cell stabilizer, which will prevent the degranulation of mast cells. The drugs are sodium chromoglycate, ketotifen, and another drug is there, nidocromil. Fourth group is a corticosteroids. As I told you, these are the mainstay for suppression of inflammation because of their anti-inflammatory action. So corticosteroids, they are not bronchodilator. They are used in asthma because of their anti-inflammatory action. First is a systemic corticosteroid which can be given by either oral or IV intramuscular, that is parenteral route. Drugs like hydrocortisone used mostly IV and prednisolone mostly used as a oral and others drug. While there is a second group is a inhalational corticosteroid which are given through the meter dose inhaler. जो हम अस्थमा का पंप बोलते हैं, अस्थमा का inhaler. So these are given through the meter dose inhaler. Which are the inhalational corticosteroid? Beclomethasone dipropionate, budesonide, fluticasone propionate, flunisolide, and cyclesonide. Okay, these are the inhalational corticosteroid. And last drug is a anti-IgE antibody which neutralizes the IgE, and that is the omalizumab. So these are the drugs used in the treatment of bronchial asthma. Now we will see the individual drug. In that, first is a sympathomimetic or beta 2 agonist. Now how they acts? They produces the bronchodilation through the beta 2 receptor stimulation. Beta 2 receptor are G protein coupled receptor, and beta 2 receptor stimulation will increase the adenylyl cyclase, and that adenylyl cyclase will cause conversion of ATP into the cyclic AMP, and increase in cyclic AMP in bronchial smooth muscles will cause the relaxation of bronchial smooth muscles. So this is the main mechanism how the beta 2 agonists they are producing the bronchodilation. G protein coupled receptor, increase in cyclic AMP and relaxation of bronchial smooth muscles. Second mechanism, increase in cyclic AMP in the mast cells and other inflammatory cells. Other inflammatory cells means like eosinophils, basophils, or lymphocyte or macrophages. So increase in cyclic AMP decreases the mediator release. Inflammatory mediators like histamine, leukotrienes, prostaglandin release is decreased by giving this drug. But this action is very much minimal. These are the most effective and fastest acting bronchodilators when inhaled. They produces the bronchodilation mostly within 5 minutes, especially the drugs like salbutamol. Therefore, these are the drug of choice for the acute attack of bronchial asthma. This is asked as an MCQ as well as in the Viva. Which is the drug of choice for acute attack of bronchial asthma? The answer will be the salbutamol. Okay, and they are mostly given through the inhalational route through the meter dose inhaler. But because they are sympathomimetic, they can increase the blood pressure and they can increase the cardiac activity. They show that's why they should be used cautiously in hypertensive patient, ischemic heart disease patient, those who are suffering from myocardial infarction, and in those who are receiving the digitalis. Now coming to the individual drug, first is a salbutamol, which in America is also called as a albuterol. Okay, so this is a short-acting beta-2 agonist. That's why it is also called as a SABA. It is highly selective beta-2 agonist. What is the meaning of this? We know there are three types of beta receptor: beta-1, beta-2, and beta-3. Beta-1 receptors are present mainly in the heart, beta-3 in adipose tissue, and in the rest of the places like bronchial smooth muscle, beta-2 receptors are present. Now we want to stimulate which receptor in asthma? In bronchi, that is beta-2. So we don't want beta-1 stimulation. So that's why this is a good drug. They are highly selective beta 2. Cardiac side effects are very less prominent because action on beta 1 is very less, but still the action is there on beta 1. Okay, so there are certain side effects also which we'll see. Now, inhalational salbutamol produces the bronchodilation within 5 minutes and the action lasts for 2 to 4 hours. So that is a very fast action within 5 minutes, but the action lasts for short duration, that is 2 to 4 hours. That's why they are short acting. That's why they are useful mainly to abort and terminate the attack of asthma, but they are not suitable for round the clock prophylaxis. What is the meaning of this? If the patient is having a severe asthma, उसको बहुत तकलीफ हो रही है सांस लेने में, sudden breathlessness, then you can give the inhalational salbutamol. But if the patient is having the chronic asthma, then these type of the drugs are less effective, or they are not suitable for round the clock prophylaxis because they are not giving the total 24-hour action. Okay? So there are at that time we have to use certain other drugs like corticosteroid and long-acting beta-2 agonist. What are the side effects of salbutamol? The very important is a muscle tremor. Okay, because beta 2 receptor are present in the skeletal muscles and they are stimulated. That's why muscle tremor is a common side effect of salbutamol. Palpitation, that is increase in heart rate, or in other language we can call tachycardia. Restlessness, nervousness because of some amount of sympathetic system stimulation, throat irritation, and ankle edema and hypokalemia. So it is causing the decrease in potassium level. That's why hypokalemia, ankle edema. If you have to remember by mnemonic the side effects of salbutamol, one is a tremor, second is a tachycardia, and third is a tolerance. So all they are starting with a T. Okay. The tolerance we will see in the coming slide. Now, when it is given by oral route, it has a very high first pass metabolism. Okay, as we all learn in the general pharmacology, when the drug is taken by oral route, it may be degraded in the liver and intestinal wall, and only some amount or depend upon the drug reaches the systemic circulation. So salbutamol, because of high first pass metabolism, oral viability is only 50%. Okay, that's why we are not preferring the oral salbutamol and we are preferring the inhalational salbutamol. Oral salbutamol acts for 4 to 6 hours. It is longer acting, but it is not superior in bronchodilator efficacy. However, and there are more frequent side effects also, but still oral beta 2 agonist therapy is reserved. Means it can be given for which patient who cannot correctly use inhalers or as an alternative or adjuvant drug in severe asthma. So in severe asthma patient, they can be given as an adjuvant drug, means oral salbutamol, or in a patient who cannot correctly use the inhalers. What is the dose of salbutamol when we are giving through the meter dose inhaler or MDI? It is 100 to 200 microgram per puff. Puff means when we are pressing the inhaler for one time, it is called as a one puff. So almost one puff contains 100 microgram. If we have to take the 200 microgram, we have to take the two puff. So 100 to 200 microgram per puff by inhalation is given. It can be repeated 3 to 4 times daily with a gap of 4 to 5 hours depending upon the attack of asthma. Now, why not regular use of salbutamol? I told you that it is useful only for terminating the acute attack of asthma and it is not suitable for the chronic asthma, for the round the clock. Why? Because regular use does not reduce the bronchial hyperreactivity. What is our main pathology? Inflammation along with bronchial hyperreactivity. That is not reduced by regular use of salbutamol, that is even worsen. It may, the situation may become worse. And there is a diminished responsiveness seen after the long-term use of this drug. Why? Because there is a regular use down regulates the bronchial beta 2 receptor. See, in the receptor we know there is a down regulation and up regulation. So when you are taking the salbutamol continuously daily, the receptor become insensitive. Just like if you are eating or only one type of food, say Maggie, every day, then you are ultimately fed up with the Maggie. Okay, so just like that, when we are giving the drug like salbutamol daily, the beta 2 receptor, they get fed up or they become desensitized, and there is a down regulation, means decrease in number of beta 2 receptor. That's why the response which was seen initially to the salbutamol, that is decreased. Now we are not going to have that same response. So what is advised for this patient? The patients requiring the regular salbutamol medication or having the increased frequency of asthma attack, they should be treated with inhalational steroids, corticosteroids, with or without inhaled long-acting beta-2 agonist. So now it is the step to increase the pharmacotherapy, or we have to add certain drugs like inhalational corticosteroid along with inhalational long acting beta 2 agonist like salmeterol and formoterol. Okay, so when the patient is requiring the regular salbutamol, so it is the indications to start with inhalational corticosteroid along with salmeterol. While short-acting beta-2 agonist inhaler should be restricted to the symptomatic relief of wheezing as and when required. It is not useful use as a daily purpose. जब जब अटैक आएगा तभी सिर्फ सॉल्बिटामोल लेना है, अदरवाइज डेली बेसिस पे कॉर्टिकोस्टेरॉइड इनहेलेशनल रूट से और सॉल्मेट्रॉल इनहेलेशनल रूट से. Now coming to the next drug, salmeterol. So this is a long-acting beta-2 agonist, also called as a LABA. So there are two drugs, salmeterol and formoterol. So salmeterol, apart from longer duration of action, it has a slow onset of action. It takes time to reach to the peak. While formoterol, as the name starts from the F, in comparison to the salmeterol, it has a faster onset of action. So these both are more beta 2 selective than salbutamol, and when we are using salmeterol concurrently with inhalational glucocorticoid or corticosteroid, they produces the effect equivalent to the double dose of corticosteroid. So rather than giving the double dose of corticosteroid, we can combine the corticosteroids and the salmeterol or formoterol. Okay. But remember, this LABA should be used only in combination with inhalational steroid, and they should not be used alone, because there are some cases of increase in the worsening of asthma attacks when we are using the salmeterol and formoterol as a alone. So they should be used only in combination with inhalational steroid. Okay. This is the black box warning which is written in the long acting beta 2 agonist, that they should not be used alone, they should be used only in combination with inhalational corticosteroids. Now we have seen the first group, that is of the bronchodilators, sympathomimetic, salbutamol, short acting, salmeterol and formoterol, long acting. Now the next group is a methyl xanthines, and these are the directly acting bronchodilator. Now theophylline is which is the actual drug which we are going to see. It is one of the three naturally occurring methylated xanthine alkaloids. Okay, so there are three xanthine alkaloids: caffeine, theophylline and theobromine. Okay, so these can be useful in the asthma, but one which is very commonly and more specific to be used in the asthma is a bronchodilator, is a theophylline. Now there are various actions of both of these on various body systems. So we are going to see only in this chart in a brief the CNS. So caffeine means the which is present in the coffee, as you know, it is the stimulatory for the CNS, and that stimulation is more as compared to the theophylline, and that's why we are taking the coffee when someone want to have a concentration during the study and having the sleepiness or drowsiness. So that's why we are taking the coffee, because it is causing the CNS stimulation. Apart from that, on the heart, the caffeine and theophylline both are stimulatory, but theophylline is more stimulatory for a heart, that is, it increases the cardiac output. On the blood vessels, theophylline will cause the relaxation, that is vasodilatation. So there may be some drop in the blood pressure. While on bronchi, which is the main action, that's why we are using in asthma, they produces the bronchodilation. And here you can see the theophylline has a 3 positive and caffeine has only 1 positive. That's why theophylline is useful as a bronchodilator in asthma rather than the caffeine. Apart from that, they are also causing increased contractility of the skeletal muscles. They are causing the gastric mucosa irritation, and this is not advantage, this is a side effect or disadvantage. That's why the patient may experience the acidity or dyspepsia type of the symptom with the methylxanthines. And there are two other actions, phosphodiesterase inhibition and adenosine antagonism, that we will see in the coming slide. And these two actions are very important for its bronchodilatory effect. Now coming to the actions of methylxanthines, it is very commonly asked as in Viva also or short note. So there are three actions. First is the release of calcium from sarcoplasmic reticulum, especially in the skeletal and cardiac muscle. As you know, in the skeletal and cardiac muscle, sarcoplasmic reticulum is there, which is a storage house of calcium. This methylxanthine stimulate the sarcoplasmic reticulum and calcium is released, and it mainly causes increase in diaphragmatic contractility, which will help the patient in respiration. So this is the first action in asthma patient. Second is inhibition of phosphodiesterase enzyme, which is also called as a PDE, which degrades the cyclic nucleotides. You can see this diagram. First, there is a ATP or GTP, and they are converted into the cyclic AMP or cyclic GMP through adenylyl cyclase enzyme or guanylyl cyclase enzyme. And this cyclic AMP or cyclic GMP, they are responsible for bronchodilation because they causes the relaxation of bronchial smooth muscle. This action we have seen in the beta 2 agonist also. This cyclic AMP is degraded by the phosphodiesterase enzyme to 5-AMP, and we want to increase the cyclic AMP. That's why we have to inhibit this phosphodiesterase enzyme, and that is inhibited by theophylline. So theophyline's second mechanism of action is inhibition of phosphodiesterase enzyme. There are 5 to 6 isomers of phosphodiesterase, out of which hypotheses are there that phosphodiesterase 3 and 4, they are particularly inhibited by theophylline, and they will increase the cyclic AMP and will cause the bronchodilation. Now whenever the cyclic AMP is increased, apart from bronchodilation, the other two actions which happens is cardiac stimulation and vasodilatation. Okay, so cyclic AMP level whenever raised, it will cause bronchodilation, vasodilatation, that is somewhat decrease in the blood pressure, and cardiac stimulation. Third action of methylxanthine is blockade of adenosine receptor. Adenosine is one of the local mediator which is released in the CNS, CVS and some of the other organs, and it contracts the smooth muscles, especially that of the bronchi. So adenosine is responsible for bronchoconstriction. That's why we are going to block the adenosine receptor. Adenosine receptors mainly of three types, A1, A2 and A3, out of which A1 they are present in the bronchi and they are blocked by the theophylline. Raised cyclic AMP levels in inflammatory cells may attenuate the mediator release, and it also promote the eosinophil apoptosis. So apart from these three mechanisms of action, that is release of calcium from sarcoplasmic reticulum, inhibition of phosphodiesterase enzyme and increase in cyclic AMP, and blockade of adenosine A1 receptor, which are responsible for bronchodilation. The raised cyclic AMP also decreases the release of inflammatory mediators from the mast cells and other inflammatory cells like from the eosinophils, which can add for the therapeutic or beneficial effect of theophylline in asthma. But in spite of these methylxanthines or theophylline, they are nowadays very less used in the asthma, and the reason behind is that they have a higher amount of side effects, and these very serious side effects are there like cardiac arrhythmia and seizures because of adenosine A1 receptor antagonism. Remember, adenosine is actually protecting us from the seizures and cardiac arrhythmia. So if we are going to block the adenosine A1 receptor, we may achieve the bronchodilation, but in turn we can get the serious side effect like cardiac arrhythmia and seizures or epilepsy, and that's why the theophylline is nowadays very less used. Coming to the pharmacokinetics, they are very well absorbed orally. but not all the drugs. Theophylline can be and doxophylline can be given by oral route, but aminophylline we have to give by the IV route. They can cross the placenta, that's why cautiously use in the pregnant females. What is more important MCQ point of view or important point is kinetics changes from first order to zero order. This is a general pharmacology phenomenon, and we know whenever the drugs kinetics changes from first order to zero order, we cannot give higher doses of such a drug. Otherwise, these drugs will accumulate in the body and they can give rise to the toxicity as their concentration becomes means concentration is in sorry, elimination is independent of the concentration. Okay, then if the person is having this type of those factors, like age is more than 60 years, having congestive heart failure or pneumonia or liver failure, we have to reduce the dose of theophylline. Next, coming to the adverse effect, as we discussed, theophylline have a narrow margin of safety. Remember, when we are keeping the concentration, you can see this arrow of plasma concentration. When we are keeping the concentration between 5 to 15 microgram per ml, there are less side effect or minor side effect. But when the concentration is going above 15 or 20, we can see lot of serious side effect. That's why it is called narrow margin of safety. We have to keep the concentration between this range only. If concentration increase this range, beyond this range, the chances of side effects are more. Side effects mostly occur related to the GI tract, CNS and CVS. In the common side effect are headache, nervousness and nausea. But in this chart you can see that first there is a minimal side effect, then with the concentration increases there is a dyspepsia, acidity, headache, nervousness, insomnia, problem with sleep, then there is a tremor, vomiting, then tachypnea, then increased muscle tone, extrasystole, that is arrhythmia, further arrhythmia, shock, and then maybe the death. So because of this there is a less use of theophylline nowadays. Some drug interactions are very important as far as the theophylline is concerned. As the theophylline is metabolized by cytochrome enzymes, if we are giving some enzyme inducer drug, like the patient is smoker or receiving the drug like phenytoin or rifampicin or phenobarbital, then they can increase the metabolism of theophylline, and very less amount is available for the action. So in this type of the patient, we have to give the higher dose of theophylline or we have to decrease the dose of the these other drug like phenytoin or rifampicin. There are the certain drugs which can inhibit the theophylline metabolism, because of which there is a sudden increase in the plasma concentration of theophylline and it may give rise to the side effect or toxicity. The drugs which are inhibiting the metabolism of theophylline are like erythromycin, ciprofloxacin, cimetidine, oral contraceptive and etc. Coming to the preparations and dose, theophylline, it can't be injected, it is given by oral route, mostly as a SR tablet, there is a sustained release tablet, as a 100 to 300 milligram BD twice daily or TDS thrice daily. Second drug from methyl xanthine is aminophylline. Previously, aminophylline was used very commonly for the treatment of status asthmaticus. But because of increased risk of cardiac arrhythmia and seizures, nowadays it is very less useful. But still it can be given by IV route in a, but it has to be given very slow IV injection as a 250 to 500 milligram. Another drug is a doxycycline, which can be given by oral route 400 milligram OD or BD. So coming to the last part of theophylline uses, first they are useful in bronchial asthma as well as in COPD. Yes, what is COPD? It is a chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So it is a disease which is most commonly found in the smokers. Okay. So there is also a problem of breathlessness and there are certain other type of problems like emphysema. So COPD and bronchial asthma, those symptoms are somewhat overlapping. The drugs which are particularly effective, they are somewhat different. Means for bronchial asthma, we are talking mostly about the salbutamol and corticosteroid, while for COPD, we have to use mainly anticholinergic drugs. Okay, but theophylline can be useful in both asthma and COPD. So theophylline causes the bronchodilation as well as decreases the release of inflammatory mediators and augment the diaphragmatic contractility. However, because of narrow margin of safety, that is range bound concentration and limited efficacy, its use has been declined. If we have to talk about the current status, a sustained release theophylline can be used in mild to moderately severe asthma. There are various types of asthma depending upon the severity, like mild, moderate or severe. So they can be useful in mild to moderate asthma as a third line drug or as an alternative or adjunct drug. So they are not first line or second line. That's why they are not preferred. They are third line. If there is no response to the first line drug like corticosteroids or salbutamol, then we can think of adding the theophylline or aminophylline. Okay. And second use is the apnea in a premature infant. Sometimes the delivery happens at a 7th month or maybe in the 8th month, and the that infant is having the breathlessness problem, okay, because the surfactant is not produced enough, and that is called as a apnea. So this theophylline type of the drug can reduce the frequency and duration of episodes of apnea in some preterm infants. That is a, you can say, second use of theophylline. Coming to the third drug, that is the anticholinergics. As I told you that acetylcholine is responsible for bronchoconstriction by stimulating the M3 receptor. So these anticholinergic or atropinic drugs, as atropine is the main drug or prototype drug of this class. Atropinic drug causes bronchodilation by blocking M3 receptor mediated cholinergic constrictor tone. So this drug block the M3 receptor and they will antagonize the acetylcholine and they will produce the bronchodilation. What is major difference that this drug act primarily in the larger airways which receive the vagal innervation, as they are inhibiting the cholinergic system or inhibiting the vagus, and they are responsible for bronchodilation in larger airways, while sympathomimetics are responsible for a bronchodilation in the smaller airways. The two drugs are there: ipratropium bromide from anticholinergic. It is a short acting, duration is 4 to 6 hours and given by inhalational route as a bronchodilator. While tiotropium bromide, it can also be given by inhalational route, but it is a longer acting because duration is 24 hours. So ipratropium bromide is a short acting, 4 to 6 hours. Tiotropium bromide is a long acting. But both are less efficacious than inhaled beta 2 agonist in bronchial asthma. So they are less efficacious as compared to salbutamol or salmeterol. That's why salbutamol is preferred. However, patients of asthmatic bronchitis or COPD or psychogenic asthma, they respond better. These are the bronchodilators of choice in COPD. So I have told you earlier that in COPD, anticholinergics are used mainly as a bronchodilator, while in asthma, beta 2 agonists are useful as a bronchodilator mainly. Okay. Tiotropium is rated more effective than ipratropium, and these drugs are better suited for regular prophylactic use. So rather than terminating the acute attack where we are going to use salbutamol, these drugs are useful for regular prophylactic use. Okay. We can give the combination of inhalational ipratropium with beta 2 agonist. So these two drugs can be given as a combination. There are certain inhalers which contain both the drug, and the combination will produce more marked and long lasting bronchodilation. So we can achieve the better bronchodilation when we are combining these two drugs, anticholinergics and beta 2 agonist. Sometimes have you seen the nebulizer? It is present mostly in the wards for steam inhalation. So nebulized ipratropium mixed with salbutamol is employed in the refractory asthma. Refractory asthma means the patient is not responding to the initial therapy or salbutamol type of drugs or other drugs. Then we are going to give the combination of salbutamol with ipratropium by nebulizational route. Okay. Now coming to the fourth type of the drug in asthma is a leukotriene antagonist. As we have seen, leukotrienes are responsible for bronchoconstriction and they are released from the mast cells granules. So the drugs are montelukast and zapirlukast. What is mechanism of action? They competitively antagonize the cis-LT1 receptor mediated bronchodilation. bronchoconstriction. So they antagonize these leukotriene receptor, because of which the bronchoconstriction is prevented. They also decreases the airway mucus secretion. They decreases the vascular permeability and recruitment of eosinophils. But they are indicated mainly for prophylactic therapy of mild to moderate asthma, because they are, once the bronchoconstriction has already occurred, they are very less effective. That's why we have to give them before the bronchoconstriction has happening, means as a prophylactic role, as an alternative to inhaler glucocorticoids. As we know, the glucocorticoids are useful for the prophylaxis as well as treatment. When we have to use the glucocorticoid for prophylaxis purpose, we can give leukotriene antagonist in the mild to moderate asthma. So these leukotriene antagonists are also effective in aspirin-induced asthma and exercise-induced asthma. So sometimes aspirin and exercise can induce the asthma. How the aspirin can induce the asthma? There is a logic is that the arachidonic acid, which is produced from membrane phospholipids, it can be diverted to the two pathways. One, it can produce the prostaglandins through the cyclooxygenase pathway. Second, it can produce the leukotrienes through the lipooxygenase pathway. When we are giving the aspirin as being the painkiller, it will inhibit the production of prostaglandin by inhibiting the cyclooxygenase enzyme. That's why arachidonic acid is diverted to produce more and more leukotrienes, and that's why the patient can suffer from bronchoconstriction and asthma. So in this type of the patient, or sometimes the exercise can induce or exacerbate the asthma, these montelukast and zapirlukast can be useful, but they are of no value in COPD. These are very safe drug. They produces only few side effects like headache and rashes. But one characteristic side effect which is associated with montelukast and zapirlukast is Churg-Strauss syndrome, also called as a vasculitis with eosinophilia, means inflammation of vessels along with increase in the eosinophils. There is another drug in this category. So the drug is Xyluton. As I told you, there is a lipooxygenase enzyme. So arachidonic acid with the help of lipooxygenase enzyme will produce the leukotrienes. So either we can inhibit this enzyme or either we can inhibit the receptors for leukotrienes. So Xyluton will inhibit the enzyme 5-lipoxygenase, while the montelukast and zapirlukast, they are inhibiting the receptors for these leukotrienes. Leukotrienes LTB4, LTC4 and LTD4. But Xyluton is less preferred because of its hepatotoxic potential. Coming to the next group of the drug, that is a mast cell stabilizers. As the name indicates, they are stabilizing the mast cells. So the drugs are sodium chromoglycate, nidocromil and the ketotifen. Sodium chromoglycate, it inhibits the degranulation of mast cell as well as other inflammatory cells like eosinophils, lymphocyte or basophils by trigger stimuli. By inhibiting the degranulation of mast cells, the mediators of asthma like histamine, leukotrienes, platelet activating factors and interleukins, they are not released and their release is restricted. Okay. The second thing, chemotaxis of inflammatory cells is inhibited. What is chemotaxis? Wherever there is a site of inflammation, inflammatory cells get attracted to that site. That is called chemotaxis. That is inhibited by the sodium chromoglycate type of a drug. They also inhibit the bronchospasm, which is induced by the allergen or some irritants or cold air or exercise. So these are not a bronchodilator, but and this does not also antagonize the constrictor action of histamine and leukotrienes. That's why they are ineffective during the asthmatic attack. But they should be useful as a prophylactic purpose. Prophylactic means suppose someone has a seasonal asthma. So before that particular season starts, he should start taking the inhalational sodium chromoglycate. These drugs are not absorbed orally, that's why they are given as an aerosol through the meter dose inhaler. So what are the uses of this sodium chromoglycolate or mast cell stabilizer? In a bronchial asthma, as a long-term prophylactic, especially in mild to moderate asthma, it decreases the frequency and severity of attacks, especially in extrinsic or atopic asthma, where there is an allergic etiology, okay, and exercise induced asthma. Apart from allergic asthma, it can be useful in allergic rhinitis and allergic conjunctivitis. This is a very good use of sodium chromoglycate. So, and just to mention, montelukast and zafirlukast, they can also be useful in allergic rhinitis and allergic conjunctivitis, because these are the type of the drugs which are acting on allergic component. Though they have a prophylactic role, but they can be useful in the allergic rhinitis and allergic conjunctivitis. Next drug is a ketotifen. It is actually a H1 antihistaminic drug blocking the H1 receptor and produces the sedation, but it can also inhibit the inflammatory cells and it can reduce the mediator release. Coming to a very important drug, that is a corticosteroids. Okay, so these are the mainstay in the treatment of bronchial asthma, and a short note is very commonly asked on the role of corticosteroids in bronchial asthma. So glucocorticoids are not bronchodilators. So these are not dilating the bronchi like beta-2 agonist or methylxanthines or anticholinergic. These are not dilating the bronchi. This is a very common mistake which the students perform. So how they are useful? They benefit by reducing the bronchial hyperreactivity. Okay, so they reduces the bronchial hyperreactivity, they reduces the mucosal edema, and they suppresses the inflammatory response to the antigen antibody reaction or other trigger stimuli. Okay, so because of their anti-inflammatory action and somewhat immunosuppressant action, they reduces the bronchial hyperreactivity and mucosal edema. Apart from this, they improve the airflow. They reduces the asthma exacerbations. Exacerbations means sudden increase in attack of asthma. Okay, that is reduced. They may influence the airway remodeling. The pathology which has been happen in trachea and bronchi, that is reduced or reversed by the steroids, and they retard the disease progression and they further prevent the progression of asthma. Also, they increases the airway smooth muscle responsiveness to the beta-2 agonist and reverse the refractoriness or tolerance which is developed to this drug. I have told you that long-acting beta-2 agonist should never be used alone and they should be given in combination with corticosteroid. The reason is that here the corticosteroid decreases the development of tolerance to beta-2 agonist. That's why they should be given in combination with long-acting beta-2 agonist like salmeterol or formoterol. So the corticosteroid, they can be useful by systemic or either by inhalational route. Systemic steroid therapy, that is oral or IV route, is preferred in two conditions: severe chronic asthma and status asthmaticus. Severe chronic asthma which is not controlled by bronchodilators or inhalational steroid, we can start with prednisolone at a dose of 20 to 60 milligram daily, and then we can try to reduce the dose of steroid since a long-term doses of steroid have a severe side effects. Second condition where we can use the steroid by systemic route is a status asthmaticus or acute asthma exacerbation. So asthma attack which is not responding to the intensive bronchodilator therapy, we can start with IV hydrocortisone. So it is one of the drug of choice in status asthmaticus, IV hydrocortisone, which generally acts for 6 to 24 hours. And we can also give in the COPD a short courses of oral glucocorticoid like prednisolone. Okay. Inhalational steroid. These are the preferred drugs nowadays for the treatment of chronic asthma, or in other words moderate to severe persistent asthma, okay, or even mild persistent asthma. Why the inhalational steroids are preferred? Because they have a high topical and low systemic activity, because we want the action in bronchi and trachea and we don't want their systemic absorption into the blood to avoid the systemic side effects. So that's why they are preferred. Because airway inflammation is present in early mild disease as well and bronchial remodeling starts developing from the beginning, it has been advocated that inhaled steroids should be the step one approach for all asthma patients. So once the disease is persistent or chronic, whether it is mild, moderate or severe, we have to give the inhalational steroids. Okay. But if the disease is only episodic, okay, only episodes of asthma and in between two episodes the patient is all right, then there is no need to give the inhalational steroid. So they are indicated in all cases of persistent asthma when inhaled beta 2 agonists like salbutamol are required almost daily. So when the patient is requiring the daily salbutamol, now it is an indication to start with inhalational corticosteroid. Start with 100 to 200 microgram dose by meter dose inhaler twice daily. Then you can titrate the dose upward every 3 to 5 days, but maximum mostly 400 microgram QID, means 600 microgram, or at the most 2000 microgram, beyond which no further benefit is observed, or there are higher chances of side effects rather than the benefits. So inhalational steroids should be used in the asthma because they suppresses the bronchial inflammation. They increases the PEFR, that is a peak expiratory flow rate. Remember, in asthma, we are going to perform certain test for the patient, that is a pulmonary function test, PFT, in which we are going to calculate the FEV1 or PEFR. Okay. So this PFR is increased by the corticosteroid. So that is a good thing. They reduces the need for rescue beta 2 agonist inhalation. Rescue beta 2 agonist inhalation means if someone has a asthma attack suddenly while on a steroid therapy, he has to use the salbutamol. So these uses of salbutamol decreases if we are going to use the steroid for the daily basis, and they prevent the episodes of acute asthma. There are certain side effects of inhalational steroid like hoarseness of voice, dysphonia, sore throat, and sometimes asymptomatic or symptomatic oropharyngeal candidiasis. Because the steroids are causing suppression of immunity, higher chances of fungal infection like a candidiasis. So how this can be minimized? By the use of spacer. Okay, so sometimes when a patient is not able to use properly meter dose inhaler, there is another device which can be kept in between the patient mouth and meter dose inhaler, that is called spacer. So spacer gives you enough time to take inspiration. Okay, that can be used to minimize the deposition of these corticosteroid particles on respiratory mucosa. Gargling should be done after every dose to wash off the drug which is deposited on oral and pharyngeal mucosa. This is very useful, gargling, to prevent the candidiasis. And if at all, we can use the topical nystatin for prevention as well as clotrimazole as a for the treatment, or certain fluconazole type of the antifungal drug if at all candidiasis occurs. Inhaled steroids are considered safe during the pregnancy. So they can be useful in the pregnant female patient with asthma. Which are the drugs from inhalational steroids? These are the names: beclomethasone dipropionate, budesonide, fluticasone propionate, flunisolide, and last is a cyclesonide. Okay. So these all drugs are preferred by inhalational route through the meter dose inhaler. Especially budesonide comes in a combination with formoterol, which is a long-acting beta-2 agonist. Fluticasone comes in combination with salmeterol. So there are combination inhalers also along with long-acting beta-2 agonist. So these are the very commonly useful drug. One thing which is important with cyclesonide, that it is a prodrug, means it is inactive and it needs to be activated in the body, and that is activated by esterases enzyme present in the bronchial epithelium to raise the active moiety. Again, in this way, if it is absorbed into the blood, it is extensively bound to the plasma proteins, so higher plasma protein binding, because of which minimizes the exposure of tissue cells to the free and active drug. Why this is important? A systemic side effects of the cyclesonide are very less, so that's why it is one of the preferred drug nowadays. And coming to the last drug from this category of the drugs used in asthma is omalizumab. It is an anti-IgE antibody. Okay, this G is actually a small one. So we know it neutralizes the IgE antibody. So it is a humanized monoclonal antibody. I have told you, whenever there is a lastly mab, it indicates monoclonal antibody, and it is neutralizing the our human antibody, that is IgE. How it is administered? Subcutaneously. Remember, in asthma, some drugs are given by oral route, some by subcutaneous, and some by inhalational. So mostly by inhalational we are giving the drug. But certain drugs like montelukast or zapirlukast or theophylline, doxophylline can be given by oral route, while omalizumab has to be given by subcutaneous route. It neutralizes the free IgE which is present in circulation without activating the mast cells. Okay, but the another drawback, it is very expensive. Okay, that's why it should be reserved for resistant asthma patients. The asthma patients who are not having the proper response with a bronchodilator or corticosteroid therapy, there we can think of using the omalizumab, and especially which are having the positive skin test. Positive skin test is done when we are having a suspicion of allergy. So this type of the patient have a higher amount of IgE antibody or raise IgE levels in the blood. In such a type of the patient who require frequent hospitalization, we can use the omalizumab. Asthma medications, whenever given by inhalational route, they can come into the two forms. Either the drug can be given as an aerosol or as a dry powder. When we are giving by aerosol, it can be given either through the MDI, that is a meter dose inhaler, or either through the nebulizer. When we are giving through the dry powder, it is given through the rotainhaler or spinhaler. This is the meter dose inhaler. This is the diagram of meter dose inhaler. This is a part which is a mouthpiece, should be kept in the mouth. There is a canister here and we have to press the canister, and by pressing the canister, the drug which is present in this meter valve will come through the mouthpiece, and that can be swallowed with the inhaled with the inspiration. Okay. This is the nebulizer you have seen in the ward, which is especially useful in the pediatric setting for the steam inhalation. We can put the salbutamol type of the drug or other anticholinergic type of drug, and we can take the drugs to the nebulizer. But when we are taking the drug through the nebulizer, very less amount actually reaches the trachea and bronchi. That's why they are useful only in the patients who are not able to correctly use the inhaler. Okay. This is the spacer. See, this is the inhaler. This is the spacer, and it can be kept in between the inhaler and space mouthpiece. Okay, mouth. So spacer is useful in between the inhaler and mouth, especially in the children or elderly who are not able to correctly use the inhaler. Because when you are going to use the inhaler, you have to take the deep inspiration, which is not possible for the children or elderly or very sick patient. That's why we can use the inhaler. There are the various steps which you can read through the various textbooks of using the inhaler or using the spacer. Now the important part of this lecture, the stepwise approach to the treatment of asthma. So either it can be a mild intermittent or mild episodic asthma, or it can be persistent asthma, while mild, moderate, severe or very severe persistent asthma. Okay, so in this you can see when there is a step 1, that is a mild episodic, we have to start with a short acting beta 2 agonist. When it becomes mild persistent, we have to start with the step 2, that is ICS. ICS means inhalational corticosteroids in a low dose. When it becomes moderate persistent, then apart from inhalational corticosteroid in the low dose, we have to add the LABA, that is a long acting beta 2 agonist like salmeterol or formoterol. When it becomes severe persistent, then we have to use the inhalational corticosteroid dose from low to medium or high. Okay, means if you are using the 400 microgram, we have to increase to the 800 to 1600 microgram, and we have to give the LABA here also. And it becomes very severe persistent, then apart from giving inhalational corticosteroid in high dose and giving the long acting beta 2 agonist, we have to add the oral corticosteroids also. So this is how we are increasing the stepwise drug when the asthma severity is increasing stepwise. Okay, so this is called as a stepwise approach. The same thing is explained theoretically when it is a mild episodic asthma. When we are calling mild episodic, when the symptoms are less than once daily, दिन में एक बार से कम आ रहा है, and in between the attack the patient is normal. So only inhalational short acting beta 2 agonist like salbutamol is sufficient. No other drug is required. If it is seasonal asthma, only during the particular season asthma is present, then give low dose inhalational steroid or sodium chromoglycolate, that is a mast cell stabilizer, 3 to 4 weeks before anticipated seasonal attacks. और season start होने के 3 से 4 हफ्ता पहले start करो corticosteroid by inhalational route या फिर sodium chromoglycolate and continue till 3 to 4 weeks after the season is over. नेक्स्ट माइल्ड क्रोनिक और माइल्ड परसिस्टेंट अस्थमा सिम्टम्स वंस डेली. अभी डेली सिम्टम्स आना स्टार्ट हो गए. ऐसे पेशेंट में आपको रेगुलर यू हैव टू यूज लो डोज inhalational steroid, means 100 to 500 microgram per day is a low dose. This is a step 2. Okay, you can alternatively use some other drugs, but inhalational steroids are the best one. And if there is a asthma attack, you have to give the salbutamol. नेक्स्ट स्टेप, दैट इज स्टेप 3 इज मॉडरेट अस्थमा विथ फ्रीक्वेंट एक्सेसरबेशन. अभी अटैक्स अफेक्ट द एक्टिविटी, अभी उसका चलना फिरना एक्टिविटी अफेक्ट हो गई है और अटैक इज मोर देन 1 पर डे. इन सच अ पेशेंट इंक्रीजिंग डोसेस ऑफ इनहेलेशनल स्टेरॉइड अप टू 800 माइक्रोग्राम. यहाँ पे हम 500 माइक्रोग्राम तक दे रहे थे पर डे इनहेलेशनल स्टेरॉइड के डोसेस, अभी हमने 800 माइक्रोग्राम पर डे तक इंक्रीज कर दिया क्योंकि अस्थमा माइल्ड से मॉडरेट हो गया. Plus inhaled long-acting beta-2 agonist like solmeterol or formoterol. Okay. Next is a severe asthma when there are the continuous symptoms, activity is limited, frequent hospitalization is required. We have to use the very high doses of inhalational steroid, 800 to 2000 microgram per day, plus inhalational long-acting beta-2 agonist like salmeterol twice daily. And apart from these two drugs, we have to add एडिशनल ट्रीटमेंट विथ 1 और मोर ऑफ द फॉलोइंग. ये 4 या 5 में से और एक ड्रग ऐड करना पड़ता है, दैट इज स्टेप 4. ल्यूकोट्राइन एंटागोनिस्ट लाइक मोंटेलुकास्ट और जाइप्रोलुकास, सस्टेन रिलीज ओरल थियोफाइलिन दैट इज फ्रॉम मिथाइलजैंथिन कैटेगरी, oral beta-2 agonist means oral salbutamol, or inhaled ipratropium bromide which is an anticholinergic. So this drug have to added apart from steroid and the LABA, okay, in step 4. If patient is not adequately controlled in spite of this treatment or those needing frequent emergency, institute the oral steroid therapy, that is a prednisolone mostly, okay, that is a step 5, okay, or IV methylprednisolone type of the drug. And now coming to the last slide of this lecture and the last part which can be asked as a short note, the treatment of status asthmaticus, which is also called as a refractory asthma. So either when the patient is having very severe acute asthma and you have to hospitalize the patient, especially in the ICU, and it is a refractory asthma, means not responding to the earlier used drug like inhalational corticosteroid or LABA or even oral corticosteroids or salbutamol, then we have to give the drug of choice, that is a systemic corticosteroid, and we have mentioned this hydrocortisone hemisuccinate. It is given as a 100 milligram IV, which should be followed by 100 to 200 milligram 4 to 8 hourly infusion by IV route. Okay. Next, we can also use in addition or adjuvant with a hydrocortisone if proper response is not there, nebulizational route salbutamol plus ipratropium bromide combination. So anticholinergic and salbutamol means beta-2 agonist combination, but by nebulizational route, because inhalationally may not be, patient is not in that condition because of acute asthma attack to take the drug by inhalational route. Okay. And sometimes we have to give the humidified oxygen inhalation. So yes, oxygen inhalation or a ventilator should be provided depending upon the patient oxygen requirement. As there is a bronchoconstriction, the patient is having the insufficient oxygen in the body. Salbutamol or terbutaline as a 0.4 milligram intramuscular or subcutaneous may be given if the patient bronchi are very narrowed and the patient is not getting enough relief from this nebulizational route. Okay. Sometimes we have to intubate the patient, endotracheal tube we have to insert, and we have to do the mechanical ventilation. If there is associated chest infection, then we have to give the antibiotic therapy. If there is associated any other respiratory infection, bacterial or viral, proper antibiotic therapy. If there is a dehydration and acidosis, then we have to give the normal saline, and for correcting the acidosis we have to give the sodium bicarbonate or lactate infusion. So this is all about the bronchial asthma. So this is a very important topic. Bronchial asthma, bronchoconstriction is a main thing, but inflammation is the underlying pathology. That's why we have to use the bronchodilators drugs and we have to use the corticosteroid. A short note can be asked in the role of corticosteroid and asthma, or on a salbutamol also, and a status asthmaticus. So hope I am able to clear all your doubts. Thank you. So fight asthma and not fright asthma.